Admiral Zap Zlatoper. It's great to have you here. It's been a long time. We spent some time on the radio together, and it's nice to see you at ThinkTech.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be back. I listen to you all the time. I watch you when I can, and I'm doing a lot off island, a lot back here, but it's really good to reconnect. I mean, and maybe do a little retrospective, I guess, over
Sure,
the
absolutely.
last 8 years. I guess.
Absolutely. So you wanted to sort of tap into your experience with the economy. You've been a trustee of the Campbell estate, and you've seen a lot of things happen in the period of your trust relationship with them. And I'm sure you've been following the economy closely. So can you give us a handle on, from your perception, how's the economy of Hawaii doing?
It's a challenge. They're great. But out of every challenge comes opportunities. I hope we seize those opportunities. But it's very interesting. The Campbell Estate has done a wonderful job. The family members have worked together to make a second entity, and they're now shareholders in the James Campbell Company. They have diversified that company off island and have mainland holdings and all that type of thing. But the economy here is a very interesting one. I mentioned, I read your piece in the Advertiser this past Sunday, and I thought you were spot on in the fact that if we don't take action in the right direction that shows some thought beyond the next legislative cycle or this fiscal crisis today, if we don't start doing it, I think we are heading for an economy that's going to be largely tourism driven forever, which I can't find anybody that's anxious for that, whether you are want to return this to be a sustainable Hawaii, or whether you're into high tech, as I am, and I think you have. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I think those are symbiotic kinds of things. If you want to make a sustainable Hawaii, technology is the thing that's going to let you get there, and so that we don't create all our energy by oil that's brought in on ship bottoms and fuel and all this type of thing. I'm probably wandering from your basic topic, but I think they all fit into the state of the economy right now is a challenge. There's no question.
What makes you feel that way? I mean, what's the anecdotal or systematic evidence that you've got that makes you feel that it is a challenge?
I have friends that run businesses, and everybody has, and perhaps maybe our government could take a little lesson from this. They all had to cut costs.
Yeah.
And happily, I think everybody realizes the last thing you want to do is fire someone and let people go, but a lot of them have downsized. A lot of organizations aren't filling jobs as they become available. And so, and I talked to, I'll give you an anecdotal thing. A woman that used to be our executive assistant for the Campbell Estate and left to go to another place, they've now had to say, well, when I saw her the other day, she said, well, we don't go out to dinner as much anymore, and we have to watch our food. And of course, if you and I don't go out to dinner, then that restaurant doesn't get that revenue and that type of thing. Now, whether we bottomed out, I think we might have economically, but whether the toll that it's taking on people that are looking for jobs has come around, I think we maybe are a little reflection of the national economy. We claim a recovery, but that's not generating the jobs that we need for the recovery.
You know, it's funny. People think that the Hawaii economy has control of its own destiny, but as a tourist destination, we don't have that much control. If somebody wants to come, that decision or not, that decision is made in Cincinnati, right. Not here.
That's right.
And if all these people are coming or not coming, that decision have nothing to do with what we want.
That's true. And that's a very good point, Jay. You know, we are in a tourist-driven economy right now. And you and I have both talked with groups that we belong to about trying to maybe get out of that mold and still become a tourism draw, but let's get into some other industries that create jobs and strengthen our economy elsewhere. Because right now, my cousins in Cleveland, Ohio, I told them, hey, come on out.
It's right near Cincinnati.
That's very true. And I just exchanged emails with them. I said, hey, we've moved out of our house and we're in the new place. Why don't you come out and visit us? And it said, no, we can't afford to make that kind of a trip this year. So they have decided, 2 years ago, they might have come out, or 3 years ago, because they were doing pretty well. Now they're watching their pennies, and so they don't make that flight here. So they're not even in that hotel that's down at Waikiki that we'd like to have.
You mentioned a minute ago about technology, and I'm certainly an evangelist along with you. But I wonder if you could comment on the status of it. I mean, how well have we done or not done in the past, say, 10 years?
Yeah, Jay, I don't know if you recall, but when I first came back here in 2000, the next year we set a group of high-tech people up.
I do remember.
And we took...
To Washington.
To Washington. I joined the Military Affairs Council here, and we go every year back to Washington to tell them about how important Hawaii is towards the military, and we visit the Pentagon and Capitol Hill, and we're here, and we've had good success. I mean, the second largest contributor to our economy right now, whether you think that's the way we ought to be or not, is the military. Although some would argue that's now government that's overtaken that as far as employment. But nonetheless, we tried to set up that kind of a thing for technology, and we visited the Homeland Security people, and we just didn't get the traction. And part of the problem is perceptions, I think, very much. Before we started this session today, I mentioned to you that I belong to a group that of CEOs, about 500 of them, and they put out Chief Executive magazine every year, and they run a poll. And last year's poll, their perception of Hawaii's economy as a place to do business rated us number 41 out of 50 states, not where we want to be. And we can argue that, well, we're not that way, but those chief executive officers of large corporations back on the mainland believe that, and so that becomes the reality. And my comment is, when I came here, I meet with a group of venture capitalists once a year, the folks that helped fund my first company back in Philadelphia, Sanchez Computer Associates. And we've stayed friends because they had a fair amount of success with what we did. And I go back every year, and I told them 2002 that, hey, we have this great thing called Act 221, 215, and
It was great.
It was, and it is still great if we can sustain it. I said, why don't you come on out and put some money into this thing? And their comment was, we can't rely on Hawaii being solid and provide. If we come out there, they'll change the rules on us.
Ooh.
And lo and behold, now we're going through exactly
They
what
must
they
have
said.
known something.
They knew us well. And then they look at things like the super ferry. And I still have yet to find a human being on this island who said, I'm glad we don't have a super ferry. I used to sit up there in my office at 4th Street Mall and look down at when it'd come on every evening and come back from Maui, and off would come a Love bakery truck, and then a bunch of pickup trucks bringing produce, and then families.
All this activity.
All that activity it wasn't for tourism, it was to support us.
Sure.
And what happened when that went away, I got several emails from those guys that I meet with every year and said, see, we told you, it's tough to do business in Hawaii.
It's true.
So, we need to change that perception, and we need to start taking some long-term actions.
But this is something that, you and I in our own ways, individually and collectively, have been saying for a while. So what is it that makes Hawaii stay in the rut? What is it that makes people accept this state of affairs and not change it?
Is it perception on our part also that good enough is fine and we don't want to see change?
Could be.
I'd like to have a conversation on that, because I really don't know. I've heard people say, well, we are like a bunch of crabs in a bucket, right? And as soon as one crab starts to get out, we all try to pull him back down. I, on the other hand, root for the success of everybody. I really believe.
I know you do.
I really do. I really like to see people succeed, and we talk about becoming sustainable Hawaii. I think technology can help us do that, and we have all the assets here. We have sun, we have water, we have wind, we have agricultural areas for biofuel and algae and all this type of thing. We need people to come in, and yet we sort of scare off the people that want to come in and try new things.
Yeah, consistently. And it's a state, it's become, and I don't think it was this way, say, before the year 2000,
No.
but it certainly has revealed itself this way in the years since 2000, increasingly, in my view. So the question is, why, what's holding us back? What are the obstacles to, seeing clearly this issue and acting on it? Why can't the state of Hawaii move forward on these very simple and obvious initiatives?
Yeah, if we had an answer, we could maybe run for office and do things.
That's coming.
That's very true. Well, it's unfortunate, because I hate to blame our government, our legislature, and all this kind of thing, but I think an awful lot of times we don't take the 10-year look at things. And you look at the folks that have been very successful, they look beyond the next 1-year cycle or 2-year cycle, and I don't know whether we just don't create that outlook in people, or they're they just are unable to have a vision and go beyond it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been thinking about it, and I think it's probably a worthy exercise to think of the obstacles that stop us.
Yeah.
And that may not mean stop everybody, but they stop the process. One of them would be, and this is not necessarily of importance, but one would be bureaucracy. Bureaucracy doesn't like to give permits. They like to hold things up. They like to, have a sort of a leverage, a power over the individuals they're supposed to, and the companies they're supposed to regulate. So, you have any thoughts on that? I mean, is there a problem in bureaucracy? Is this bureaucracy worse? I mean, you've seen a lot of government bureaucracies in your life, I know. Is this worse or better? Is this manageable or unmanageable? What can we do?
Yeah, as I say, I'm trying not to blame
Of course.
the politicians and the bureaucracy and the government, but it is interesting that how difficult it is to get title work done, to get permits, to go through that thing. Now, it's wonderful to take care of the INA and pay strict attention. We ought to take a look at things. But I'm going to be anecdotal again. I'm on the board of a company that does engineering construction worldwide, based on the mainland. They do a lot of work here, also in Hawaii, by the way. And what I consider very interesting is when Mayor Hanneman went forward and said, we are going to build 26 miles of light rail. The same time that he did that in the Middle East, in the United Arab Emirates, the sheik said, we're going to build 26 miles of light rail.
Okay, I think I know the end of the story.
This October will be the 1-year anniversary of the completion of that 26-mile.
Very interesting.
And we can't even agree on how long it's going to take us to get an environmental impact statement. Now, somewhere between, I am the first one to say, by the way, in the UAE, they did do an EIS. I'm sure it's not as comprehensive as we are going to do here, but they did one, and then the work started and it got completed. And as I say, a year ago, 9 months ago, last October, they started that rail, and it's operating. We are going to be in the process probably another 2 or 3 years before we can even break ground. I wouldn't even bet on that. And in the process, whatever the estimates for the cost are, I can guarantee you they've gone up.
And so will continue to go up.
So this fits right into and this is not exceptional. It is almost the rule on anybody that tries to do something new around here. So I think when you talk about the bureaucracy, it's easy for us to blame folks, but I fall back on, was a title guarantee that a year or so ago, got taken to task because they went in to try to help to automate
They were performing a great service for the people of Hawaii, and look what happened.
And they got, no good deed goes unpunished.
Yes.
And we almost have that mentality around here. I mean, I know those folks would have benefited from it, but everyone that has to do title processing benefited from it. And yet it was, they were taken to task.
This is not dissimilar from what happened in the super ferry.
Exactly right.
The super ferry, everybody, as you say, agrees that it's a good thing, but we can't seem to agree on letting them actually do the job.
Yeah. So it's how do we fix it? I think grind them down. I went to graduate school at MIT, and they gave me on graduation a little tin box, I guess, that I have on my desk. It says illegitimate non-carborundum.
Yes.
Don't let the bees grind you down.
Right.
And I guess we just need to stay positive and go, fight for the good force.
Let me ask you about a related
Okay.
kind of obstacle that comes to my mind anyway, and that's environmentalism, if you will. Some people call it pseudo-environmentalism because there's precious little actual environmentalism. It's more like stop all progress of any kind. And that has had a history for some years in Hawaii, but it seems much more pronounced now. As evidenced by Super Ferry. So what are your thoughts about that? I mean, am I right to say that there's a process that's actually getting worse? Am I right to say that it's not a healthy process? Am I right to say that that something should be done, something needs to be done?
We sit here, and it's very true, because I used to joke when I spent a lot of time in the Pentagon, and I used to say there were 26 people that can stop something, but no one person that can make it happen. Any
Yeah.
one of those 26 can slow it down and stop. And I think what's happened now is small groups, I call them cavers, citizens against virtually everything.
Right, okay, right.
Can put a halt to any good undertaking or any bad undertaking. I mean, and so you get a small group that's opposed to any action, and through our legal process, I think we've probably skewed it to the forgotten that it's support the will of the majority with respect for the rights of the minority now becomes the will of the minority rules if it stops any change. It really has, maybe just gotten older and more involved in trying to make things happen, or maybe I try to think that I'm not a daughtery old guy that's opposed to things, because I'm very open to a lot of good changes and trying new things, but it really has become much more difficult out there to get things done.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think people living in an island state, they don't necessarily follow things outside.
No.
You travel a lot, and you've had a lot of travel in your lifetime, so you live in a world which compares and contrasts what happens here versus what happens elsewhere. And I think you can make an interesting comparison between the way things move in Hawaii. I mean, the speed at which things get done, like the rail, for example, versus the way they get done elsewhere, like in Arabia, or,
UAE.
UAE. So compare China, for example. It seems to be that relatively we're moving slower than these other places are moving.
Yeah, it's very true. China's a very good example. I led a small delegation to China last November, and I hadn't been there for 10 years. Unbelievable, the progress. Now, I also can accept the fact that their building codes are different than ours, as evidenced by they had this earthquake here yesterday, and people died.
The one before that.
And before that, and mining disasters, and so I'm certainly not advocating for the way they do things, but in fact, there's got to be a better way for us to get more done in a quicker fashion. And where they are running away from us, most of the world, is on the education side too. I work with the University of Hawaii, the engineering school right now. We're trying to focus the engineering school here to create those college graduates that have skill sets that we need here in Hawaii.
Well, that's great. That's really important.
And it really is. And we've touched base with the military and saying, what kind of engineers do you need? And of course, the nuclear submarine folks, they need nuclear engineers. The Pacific Fleet Sea Force needs construction engineers. Not so much nanotechnology, but we need electrical engineers, and the shipbuilders need mechanical engineers and structural engineers. And Peter Crouch, the dean at UH right now, is very much involved, and he said, we want to keep our people, our young men and women here, and let's get them the education they need so they can get jobs. And along those lines, small startup companies would be a source of it. Now, then you turn around and we have furlough Fridays, and that's not helping us to get us the education that I saw in China. They're producing 10 times the number of engineers every year that we do in the entire United States. So Lord knows what the difference in the structure is.
It's a serious problem in it. And the fact the state allows the furlough Fridays, let it happen in the first place, and let it happen for how many months already? And it's a short school year, and it reflects a collective lack of will or a lack of dedication to education, which to me in these times is dangerous business when the world is moving so quickly and educating so many people so quickly, especially in China
and India.
And India.
I mean, and all those places are. I don't know what you do when you talk to call centers, but one of the things I always do if I call up for help on my computer
That's
or something,
fun.
I always ask them, where are you?
Right.
And it was very interesting. It used to be in India, and actually I worked with a company that we had a call center there and all this type of thing. But recently I've talked to people in the Philippines. Just this morning I talked to somebody in Idaho, which I thought was interesting. At least it was on the mainland.
Maybe the U.S. is coming back.
Yeah, it might be coming back, that's right. But all of those kinds of jobs take a certain skill level. I mean, but when I still talk to people about my computer, they tend to be in India.
Reminds me, this was a couple of years ago, I had a dinner with, was involved in a dinner with the vice mayor of Beijing. So I was trying to be complimentary, and I said, but Vice Mayor, it's wonderful. In China, 29% of the graduates of the colleges in China are engineers. You guys you have it right. You're graduating a lot of engineers. And he said, thank you very much for that information. However, it's not 29%, it's 59%.
That's right. They're very. I was taken with the level of education in China. 10 years changed. I hadn't been there for 10 years, and I went there this year, and it was
Isn't
a
that
great.
remarkable?
It was
Yeah.
remarkable changes in all the areas, and they're not. We're not in competition, but we are in competition in the world economy.
Sure.
So.
Sure, and it's not just China, it's everywhere. We have to keep up. It's a matter of lagging, if you lag long enough, you fall right off.
That's right. Well, one of my colleagues at the Campbell Estate, David Heenan, has just finished his latest book, but his prior book talked about essentially the fact that people used to come to the United States for an education and then they'd stay. And now they come because our university system on the mainland, and I would argue that the UH has got a very strong system also. They take that education, and now more and more they're going back to their countries, India, Indonesia, and China, and taking that and starting their own business.
And we let them.
And
in fact, we encourage them because
Yeah.
we pull their papers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
off they go,
Yeah.
and that works against us. Really a shame, but it's a shame in Hawaii.
Yeah, in
especially.
Hawaii, the education system is really, and I'll move to when I was the personnel chief for the Navy, I used to have a tough time assigning people out here because they didn't want to come for 3 reasons. They couldn't bring their pets, the housing was bad, and the education system was bad.
Right.
Well, now they can bring their pets, and we have wonderful housing,
Yeah.
and it's provided a lot of business for Hawaii construction industry.
Yeah.
And we were getting better on the education side, but now we have gotten so much visibility on this furlough Friday thing that I talked to the guy that's now the chief of personnel. He said, we're starting to have trouble sending sailors out here again because they don't want to put their kids in an education
they're right.
system. And they're right.
And good for them for figuring it out. Yeah.
And then one of our things is we hate to see our kids grow up, get educated here, and then leave, go to the mainland, but they say there aren't any jobs for them here. Okay, well, let's educate them in the right way, and then let's facilitate those small companies that need to have jobs. I mentioned to you when we talked a little about your article, I don't know if I mentioned specifically, but there's a startup company I'm worked with, and they now have got the principal offices here in Hawaii. They have an ancillary facility in Atlanta, Georgia, and now they've found it difficult to come up with the venture capital money that they need to feed the growth rate. Maybe I wouldn't blame it on, but the uncertainty about things like the Act 221, 215 delay has made those thousands that might be putting money into this company reticent to do that. So because they can't get the burn rate money they need, they're going to close up one of the facilities. And as much as I love Hawaii, when we talked about it, I said, it might make more sense to move to Atlanta where you have a more business-friendly environment.
Sure, good advice, actually.
And that breaks my heart. But they're entrepreneurs. They're in this to make a living and make a profit, and they'd like to do good but do well. Mm-hmm. And so we stand a chance of losing a company that's been here for about 4 or 5 years.
I'm sure a lot of companies have left in exactly that same circumstance.
Yeah.
And what's more is we don't even know how many companies have never come out here in the same
place.
analysis. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's a deterioration going on. It's probably far greater than we realize. And the same thing with the kids. When they go back to the mainland, we are losing that entire line.
Exactly.
The bloodline, if you will.
Yeah.
It's not only them; it's their families and their children. It's their education. It's the education and the entrepreneurial activities they might involved in. So we lose, arguably the best and the brightest to the main. If you're a good student, you're there.
That's right. And you and I are not old, but we are mature.
Thank you.
But because of that, I think probably tend to be a little less risk takers than a 35-year-old that's got a great idea, who knows that he or she can start something, fail, I can start and do it again. A lot of my things right now are, I don't have 20 years to fail and then to recover from it. And so if you don't have that core of young entrepreneurs that are willing, whether it's to start a bubble tea shop or a new television show, and to try and fail and learn from that and then go and do it again, the Hank Woos, the people like that are, in there doing it, yeah, we're all going to suffer. And as you say, if they move to the mainland because there was nothing for them to do here, then we're all going to suffer.
It's incalculable how much we lose
Yeah.
every time that
Yeah.
happens.
And on the other hand, I'm trying, Nicole, we had talked earlier about if, are we heading to really just be a tourist place, and therefore learn how to either manage a hotel or clean it, and that's where your life is going to be in Hawaii, or are you going to come here and we're going to be a bunch of blue hairs like you and I are getting to be and retire here? And we certainly don't want to do that either. And, what do you do in between? I think we need to figure out a way to encourage.
Well,
folks
how do
that-
we do that? I mean, for example, there's an obvious anti-intellectual thing in Hawaii. A lot of people talk school down.
Yeah.
They couldn't care. There's a lot of people who talk business down. Profit is a dirty word. Heard that too many times. And so you have to fix attitudes,
Yeah.
public attitudes. So I guess I would put the question to you, and inherent in this is a question of whether the media is really doing its job, is how do we change their way of thinking so that we get to be a modern competitive state in the world?
And I when I was out here as a Pacific Fleet Commander, back in Washington, they used to call me the missionary from the Pacific because
There you go.
I can make a case that in the 14 and 1500s, it was the Middle East that was the center of gravity of all commerce. And then in the 1700s, it moved into Europe. And then the 1900s, the Industrial Revolution, it was England. And then for the 21st century, it was New York. That was the financial and the center of the world. And then it drifted west. And I maintain it's on its way to China
I'm
and
with you.
India. And so right now, it might be passing by us. And so we could be that hub that sort of binds together the Western world and the Eastern world, and maybe the APEC thing will
That's really critical.
gain us a little bit of traction as a place to do business, not just a place to come and lie on the beach. And if we can hang on to that for a while, but then build on it, and you're right. Then we have to capture the 1.2 million of us that are here. And how do you do that? My missionary work is limited to going to deliver talks to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis and Lions and whoever would like to hear the story. I'm willing to go out and deliver that.
That's great.
Now, what's interesting about that? All those groups are very supportive of what you and I think we'd like to see happen in Hawaii.
So talking to the choir.
So now how do we get out of the choir? That's exactly right, and go to those people that aren't in church.
Yeah.
And I whether that's it's East Honolulu or Waianae or Makaha, to sit down and say, this is not a threat to us. This is an opportunity for all of us.
Yeah.
And let's come and do it. Now, one of the things that and I don't think we can start a mass movement, but I'm on the board of the Aviation Museum, Military Aviation Museum at Pacific Aviation Museum at Pearl Harbor. And we have what we call a barnstorming tour now. And we bring school children out to the Aviation Museum where we give them a morning's worth of aeronautics. And it's amazing when you explain to kids how those games they play really work when wind comes over a wing and you look in a wind tunnel. They get very excited about it. And they say, maybe there's a reason for me to be going to school and learning some stuff. But now it's tough to bring kids in, so we've put together a road show. And we have volunteers.
them. Oh.
We go out to Punahou, we go out to Iolani, and we're going out to the public schools as they. It's very interesting because the private schools tend to say, yes, come on in and do it. The public schools, I think, are not so embracing as quickly because they're constrained in the options they can make. But when we do get in there and you spend a morning with 50 school kids in the 3rd or 4th grade and they come away with an understanding that math and science and aeronautics all tie together into really fun things, you might light that wick of high energy education needs. And that'll serve. So that's another. And I don't know whether we'll win this by 1,000 spoonfuls because I certainly don't see how we can come in with a bulldozer and change things overnight. So.
No. And kids, Hawaii kids are so great. Last week I participated as a what was it, a celebrity judge, whatever that.
Oh,
And
at the science
fair. Were you there too?
No, I wasn't there this year, but I've done that in the past.
Okay.
It was great. And
It was great fun, and it's great fun to meet the kids because they're great. There's so much energy, and they're so smart and relatable. They're wonderful. They're the best thing that Hawaii produces,
That's
really.
right.
But there's something missing between them, and making a future here.
Yeah.
Something is being lost. And I have to say, it's probably the bureaucracy that exists between them and the next step, which isn't showing them, teaching them, taking them where they have to go. But the other thing too is that I think that, back to the media, people, aside from the choir,
Yeah.
don't really get it. And how could they better get it but from the media, such as the media is?
A nice thing might be moving you to the front page instead of burying you back in section 4. This past week, it was the last page in the focus section, was it?
In the Hawaii section,
Hawaii
business
section. Yeah, and candidly, when I read the paper this morning, I only had about 2 minutes before my first meeting. I scanned the front page and I flipped through everything to see what might attract me. But if you're up there in front, and maybe that's what the media's got to, we maybe need to co-opt them and get them on board with us to say, become part of our solution instead of pointing out all our problems. And I think you and I work the same way. Let's look at the problems and then say, these are problems, therefore we have an opportunity to fix problems, and these are the solutions we can check. I hadn't thought about that in the past, but maybe we ought to go on an active campaign of trying to.
The media is in transition now anyway.
Yeah.
Something new is going to happen. The papers are in transition. The internet, will ultimately become the media. And so maybe the market, the free market of that will change things. I hope so. I think people need to be better informed, not only in Hawaii, but especially in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of obstacles and problems, and get your comment, is leadership. Everybody talks about leadership. Now, there's very few people in my life who I consider a greater leader than you, Zach. The minute I talked to you in the first place, almost 10 years ago, I'd follow you anywhere. You can be my personnel chief anytime.
Well, thank you.
So what do you think about leadership in the state of Hawaii? What haven't we done? What should we be doing?
We have some great leaders, and one of my things is I give one of my talks that I give is talks about management style and change systems and all this type of thing. And I have worked in the Navy when I was on active duty. I worked under about 8 or 9 different management systems, and zero-based budgeting and total quality management. And you go right down the line. Every administration that came in had their own thing. And I boiled it down. I said, but you put that all together, they really have 4 things. You have to have a goal, make a plan, work hard, take care of your people. And if you look around in Hawaii, you can find we have leaders, and those that are successful pretty much do that. And
not true.
And whether other bells and whistles or whoever wants to sell 1 million books by coming out with a new system, they really all boil down along those lines of filling in those 4 different points. Now, I think we have good leaders in government, but they sort of get eaten up by the system also.
That's so true. So you start out with a perfectly workable leader, a person who could be encouraged to be a great leader, and then the system just bone crushes him. At the end of the day, finished.
And there are different skills required for politics than in the private industry or education or anything else like that. I realize that, but sometimes you look at somebody and you say that person's a leader and I want to follow them, and I will. And the skill sets are. I think that there's a certain amount of innately you have an extroverted personality, if you will, but I've known some very good introverted leaders that I would follow anywhere, so maybe that's not it. But it can be learned, and you get your mentor, and you know, and you go around. And I know that we have the Pacific Fellows program here in Hawaii, which is unique, I think, among the states. The White House Fellows program, nationally known, and in fact, I think Mayor Hanneman probably had a fist in starting the program here with Tom Leppert, one of the former Campbell Estate trustees. I think they put together the Young YPO organization here, set up this Pacific Fellows thing, and so that's 30 people a year that we're going to create that have better leadership skills, and then all we need to do is convince them to stay here and have them be able to be in a place.
It's like anything else, you have to incentivize,
Exactly.
encourage, you have to take your model, what you want, and make people, do the things necessary to get people to change their conduct to follow that model.
That's right.
So what's your definition? I know this isn't easy, of a leader. And let me preface that by saying I remember the stories of Bobby Pfeiffer in A&B. The man would know every birthday, the name of every spouse and child in the company. He'd walk around on a given day and say hello to his staff, everyone in the A&B building, and people loved him. They would have done anything for him. And somehow I think you're in the same mold, and your answer is probably going to include something like that. But what is your answer?
Well, it's funny you should bring that up. I don't know if I've told you this, but the company I ran was called Sanchez Computer Associates. When I joined them, there were two brothers, the Sanchez brothers, who were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, by the way, and the venture capital guys came to me and they said, these two guys have a great product, software product, but they need, somebody to administer the, adult supervision. I don't want to say that, but it was. So I showed up at this company, and at that time they were 39 and 37, and then there were 100 other, maybe 98 other people that were 26 and below, all computer science, all geeks, we would call them now in Philadelphia. And, and this old guy showed up, and they didn't know, retired 4-star admiral going to this small group. Well, what I had done beforehand, I called the HR director, and I asked her to send me, I said, would you please send me a photo book of all the employees? So the first day I showed up, I could walk in and say, hi, Nicole. And not only that, how's your husband? And how are your two kids? And so I showed up the first day, and I knew everybody, and it made a big difference because I was a retired 4-star admiral coming into a software company, entrepreneurial, and that worked very well. It created a little bit of a problem because we were pretty successful and we started buying up companies. When I left them, we had 600 people in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, in Manchester, England, and everybody, and we had a deal that the first day of work you came in to say hello to the CEO and say, hi, how are you, and we'd meet. And everybody that walked in, they said, oh, you got to meet our CEO, Zap. He knows everybody in this company. Well, it got very, I was pretty good to 125 people. But after that, it became very difficult.
There's a limit.
There's a limit. And so we had to do things like make sure people had their names on their cubicles and that the right person was in there so I could say hello and all that. But I worked very hard, but it fits right into that. And, everybody likes to know that they're important, right?
Sure.
And that was one of the things I learned when I was in the Navy. When you have an inspection, a personnel inspection, if you made them fall in at 6:30 and they waited around till 7 for you to come to look at them, you should look at them. Do them the courtesy of inspecting.
Right. It's a resentment otherwise.
That's right. Otherwise, I learned that standing in those ranks. That if I worked for half an hour on my shoes, I wanted somebody to look at. And so
the difference between a leader that the troops like and the leader that the troops resent is enormous, and you can get so much more out of people who like being with you.
That's right. And and they also knew that you had standards and you expected them, but you also had you adhered to those same standards. Makes a big difference. Don't ask them to do something that you wouldn't be ready to do on yourself. So I tend to be the last guy to go home, not only because I overload myself periodically, but on the other hand, I'm getting to the point now I can take a meritorious afternoon off because people know that I'm willing to put my time in when we need to do it. But I think that's very true. And one of the things I learned in the Navy was you don't eat until everyone else is eaten if you're the boss.
Right. There's a certain fairness about
That's right.
that.
Exactly right.
So if you want to be a leader, you've got to be an egalitarian too.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to tell you a short story and see how we can fit this into leadership. I came out here in October of 1965, and I was directly commissioned in the Coast Guard as a Coast Guard lawyer, and I knew nothing about military protocol, although I knew what an admiral looked like from his shoulder boards. So I went to my office, which was at the time 1247 Kapiolani Boulevard, and after a time I had to go to the head. When I went to the head, I stood there in front of the urinal, and I noticed that the guy at the next urinal had like 2 stars on his shoulder boards, and I had never seen an admiral before. So I was put off by that. So I did what any Navy man would tell me never to do. I saluted at the urinal. Indoors, against all the rules. I saluted and I said, "Good afternoon, Admiral." And his name was Ted Fabic. He was 2-star. He was the district commander here. What did he do? He turned to me and he saluted back. The two of us saluting each other.
That's a great story.
So, there's a leadership point in there.
Sure.
I loved him for that, forever.
Yeah.
You know?
That's right. That's very true. And there's no menu for the leader, right? Because what works for me won't work for you necessarily.
And it's no one person, because by definition we're talking about, the people at the top of the heap. So how do we change the model here, if it's possible at all? It may not be, so that a leader or somebody who wants to be a leader is encouraged in the effort. I mean, one of the problems, for example, on running for office is you can expect people will attack you.
Yeah.
You can expect hit pieces. You can expect anything in your background that's the slightest bit embarrassing will become a big deal, and you'll have a terrible time of it. And that's the way it works. It's politics in Hawaii is a blood sport. Yeah. So how can you get leaders out of that? You can only get the people who've never done anything. You want movers and shakers, and you want thinkers, and you want people who've had an exciting life, shown a little courage. How do we get those people into leadership positions here in Hawaii?
And if you answer that, then we will,
right.
It's a real challenge. It really is a challenge, and yet you do have people that sort of rise to those positions, and I don't know whether, once again, whether we talked about bureaucracies earlier. Maybe if we get a customer service orientation like a successful business does, maybe that facilitates it. We talked earlier about the permitting processes and all that. Whenever I go into the DMV or anything to do with it, I'm delighted when I'm treated promptly and politely. And maybe how that ought to be an expectation, I guess, right? Because I always go in ready to wait and be frustrated by it, and because then I say I'm never disappointed. It's frustrating and it's not helpful. Okay, that's what I expected. I got exact. But if the person ends up being happy, polite, expeditious, and helps me solve a problem, then I'm delighted by it. Maybe we try to. We talk about aloha and ohana, and culturally there's a lot of that, and I don't know how we imbue that into the business and the political environment in this sense, but a customer service orientation would be a nice one, I think.
I keep thinking that the only thing that really comes to mind on this is if somebody who we greatly respect, a governor, for example, or maybe a member of the delegation, would speak to us all, would have like a personal relationship, eyeball to eyeball, because I think those are the best communications, and say to us, look, we encourage you to do these things. We want you to be an entrepreneur. We want you to give good service. We want to be the best, just like Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore, don't you think?
That's right. Yeah, the senior minister. That's right. I mean, that's a great example. I mean, the man created a country.
Yeah.
And essentially, he's still he's now the senior minister emeritus or something, but he's still paying attention to it. Yeah. But he has created an environment that's success. I mean, you have a small country that has no assets. I mean, no resources and all that, and yet they're educated, they're successful, and they breed their success and do it. Maybe maybe a solution would be to say, hey, let's come on over here and let us put you up at the Halekulani for 6 months, Mr. Minister, and tell us what you think.
If you could ever get him to come over, we'd make a program
I was
around
going to say
him.
that's right. It's very interesting because there are successes like that. I mean, and that's you hit Jay on one that is phenomenal. That's Singapore is a
It's
functional
really-
leadership.
It's the most fantastic success story in our
Unbelievable.
time.
Really is.
And it's a diverse, community too.
Exactly
Everybody
right.
from everywhere.
Yeah, it's how do we, if we had that model, if we could put it in place here, that would be wonderful.
It's encouraging to know that it's possible, but
Yeah.
I think in order to get there, we'd have to study it
Mm-hmm.
and emulate it, and then lead us. Somebody would have to lead us.
Your earlier reference to having somebody that would sit down and go eyeball to eyeball and explain things leads me to the shipyard at Pearl Harbor has done some magnificent turnaround. Now, and that's a leadership thing. Greg Thomas, the captain that's in place there, has contributed to it greatly. But also, so has Senator Inouye, who the senator came out and he said, look, he talked to all the workers. He said, I can't cover you guys forever. You're going to have to start performing. And I don't know if you recall, but 2 years ago we were on the Brad.
I do remember.
Close, and they were serious about that. And so that was a little motivation, but we had the good leadership in there, and you had the eyeball from the senator that came in a couple times and said, I'm not kidding you. I can't protect you all. You're going to have to deliver. And now that they've come around and they're putting their ships, we used to live on the fact that we did great work in World War II, and that was it. Now I think the last couple of ships that have come out, the submarines have come out on time, on schedule, which is good because we had a situation out there where it was cheaper for the Navy to take a submarine from Pearl Harbor, take it all the way over to the East Coast, rework it, and bring it back with their crew at less money and expense and time than it would take to choose to work here. That's not a formula.
that's not
for
gonna work for
success.
Pearl
That's
Harbor.
right.
That's
And
curtains,
those are 4,500 very good, well-paying jobs for Hawaii citizens. Now it's turned around, and it's got to be nurtured and grown, but they've done it. So it can be done.
Studied and emulated.
Yeah.
So we can't have this conversation without my recollection of this fantastic defining moment that you told me about on the radio show 8 or 9 years ago, whatever it was. It's about the Radio Shack incident. You were in the Gulf War #1. You had command of a carrier, was
Yeah,
it?
carrier group, yeah.
And you went to Radio Shack before you deployed, and you bought a little dish,
It was a big dish.
big dish, and you painted it gray like Navy issue. You put it on the fantail, and you had television from CNN, and Deborah, what's her name? Deborah Wong. Deborah Wong was one of the CNN correspondents.
Actually, Bernard Shaw. It's funny,
Shaw.
I hadn't thought about, yeah.
And then, as I recall, if I'm wrong, tell me, nobody else in the flotilla, in the other carriers, including seniors, could figure out how you were so well informed. And one day you told them. The next time you looked, everybody had a little dish from Radio Shack.
That's right. No, it's very true. I mean, and we can do that here in Hawaii too. We just have to find the right way to start it. But that's amazing that you recall that. But yeah, I had a battle
It was
group
memorable.
going to Desert Storm, and I remember. And then the actual thing was, I turned to the captain of the carrier and I said, I'd pay $500 out of my own pocket to be able to watch the news at sea. And I said, and I know that that people have antennas that are picking up satellite things, and so we went out and we bought an antenna. It was about a 4-foot antenna, like it's pretty large. Covered it with a clamshell, painted it gray. And my boss, a 3-star, I was a 1-star airman one time. When we got ready to leave, he said, "What is that?" I said, "It's a secret communication device that we have." And then it took us almost a month to get it grounded because there's so much electronic interference on a flight that could carry. But a couple of young sailors finally did it, and I'll never forget. And we had CNN International when we went into the Gulf. And what was interesting was we launched the first strikes, and we're up in the war room, which was a room about the size of this room that we're sitting in right now.
Combat Information Center?
Combat. Well, it was actually, that was one room over from that.
Okay.
We were just, the admiral and the staff in there and we had this television repeater up there, and we were watching it, and Bernard Shaw was in the Al Rashid Hotel or something in downtown Baghdad. We didn't know whether the cruise missiles were going to work, and all of a sudden things started going off, and I said, where's this hotel? And we had a map out, and we had, okay, this communication. Son of a gun, we watched the war, and so it was very interesting because it was exactly right. I was the junior admiral of the 4 that were out there, and after the first day's war, we got on the cell phone, or actually on the cell phone, it was a red phone, very complicated at that time, the 4 of us to have a conversation about what happened that day. And the senior admiral said, I think this happened. I said, well, sorry to interrupt, but I saw this happen, and I listened when I watched the Pentagon briefing, they said this. He said, how'd you do that? I said, well, we have television over here. So what happened was then we found videotape recorders, and we just taped continually anything that came over CNN, and when a helo was leaving to go to another ship, they took a VCR tape with them, and they kept track. But it was very interesting. You should remember that. And we followed the war. And in fact, my follow-on anecdote to that was Bernard Shaw did that initial thing, and then Peter Arnett, if you recall,
Sure, I do.
was on the ground, and everybody thought he was an enemy and all this. And lo and behold, 2 things happened. When I got back to Washington, I ended up being assigned to Washington. Bernard Shaw's son went to the same high school as my son, so we met there and we shared that story. But more interestingly, I went to a dinner at the New Zealand embassy, and I guess Peter Arnett is New Zealand or has a connection because he was there, as was Sandra Day O'Connor, the judge, and my wife and I can't remember who, there were 4 couples that we were all at the same table, and Peter Arnett immediately jumped on. He said, I was not against you. I said, Peter, I never thought you were against us. And in fact, I said, one night, you probably don't remember standing in front of a wrecked power center that we had attacked the day before, and I didn't know whether we got it or not. We were going to go against it again, and you were sitting there talking about the wreaked havoc. And I said, so told us we didn't need to.
You had a confirmation.
So you were providing us good intelligence. So, but that's funny that you should remember that.
Well, I do because, that particular story, and there's so much in that story. It's not just...
I'm going to interrupt, and you were exactly right. Now, every ship in the United States Navy has got an antenna on it to pick up satellite television. I'm sorry. Over
So
to you.
it was disruptive.
Yeah.
Disruptive use of technology. Yeah. It's the ultimate in creativity, as far as I'm concerned. So the question is, it was out of the box, and you don't see that a lot in the military. Here you have structures, men and ships and regulations all around you, and you think, let's go to Radio Shack and change the world. You change the world. What's the state of mind on that? How do you do that? How do you, fly out of your existing circumstance and have those kinds of thoughts?
Yeah. Number one, you have bosses that will allow you to make mistakes. And part of it is, and I think, we go through cycles in the military, as I think a lot of industry does, where we clamp down on there are too many mistakes being made, stop that, and that you naturally. And perhaps that's the bureaucracy that we rue about all the time might have been bred into that. There's no reward for a clerk doing something that's new and different that works, but there's a penalty for them if they try something new and it doesn't work, right? So how do you? I was fortunate enough to have bosses that sort of put up with. I tend to be enthusiastic about things I believe in, and willing to try new things. And by the way, I've been very successful in what my successes have come from having people that work for me who realized that it's okay if you try 5 things and 4 of them fail. If one of them is a great success, you're a hero. I prefer to have a higher success rate than that, but I'm never going to fire you for trying something new that had good intentions and was thoughtful and done in the right way. It just didn't work out. And I had, fortunately, my first couple of bosses were that way, and they gave me a little rein and tried new things. And so, and I tended to be able to justify what I did. If it didn't work out, I was doing something I loved, and I'll try something else later on. So we started this conversation talking about how do we change things around here, and part of it maybe we need to get to folks in positions to sort of say let's try to think of a way to reward people for doing new things instead of punishing them if they make a mistake, because that's what what brings about this stagnation and the anti-change. And I'm a change guy when it makes good sense to do it, and do it in the right way. So, Jay, you might have come up with a
There's another side. There's just a flip side, just a little oblique, and that's about risk.
Yeah.
You took a risk,
yeah.
but creativity and disruptive changes, require a risk.
Risk.
And I think the Hawaii culture less and less. I mean, this is an oblique off what you were saying. It doesn't. The Hawaii culture doesn't really tolerate risk very well.
That's true.
But
Yeah.
in the service, you learn to take a risk. You have a reward, and that's why I really enjoyed the service. My time in the service was the best time of my life, honestly. And the people I met were fabulous people. Coast Guard, you should join it.
Coast Guard are some of my best friends out here. Manson Brown, our two-star,
sure, I know.
is now leaving to go to take over the West Region. Got
Good for him.
a
Good for
promotion to 3 stars. Great
Yeah,
guy.
That's great.
And in fact, the last 2 commandants have been good friends of mine too. So I have close ties with the Coast Guard. Great
So
guy.
what about risk? I mean, what would you say to people? There they are. There's the people. Those are the college kids who have to make some hard decisions in their lives. They might stay, they might go, they might be entrepreneurs or bus drivers, whatever.
Yeah.
What's your advice to them about courage and risk and innovation and crabs in a bucket?
Think about the first time that you did something that was exciting that you were afraid of, whether it was dive off the high board or try to catch a wave, bigger wave than I've ever seen before. Should I go out there and try it or not? And all that type of thing. And the apprehension you have for something new. And then the rush of success, of happiness when you succeed at it. Even though you tried 20, by the way, I'm a bodyboarder, not a surfer, because I just can't. I'm too old.
It's better.
But I remember going out like 10 years ago trying to bodyboard and missing waves and missing away and missing, failing and failing. And then I remember the one time I kicked one more time, paddled one more time, caught the wave, and the rush that I got from doing that, and then wanted to keep doing it. And that's a trivial way, but it's the same kind of thing, I think, when you try something new in business or in government or in education, and it suddenly worked. I'll jump into the education side. I taught college algebra and calculus as an adjunct professor for a little bit in my earlier life. And I remember the great joy I got at explaining in an algebra class where a couple of kids just couldn't understand how this worked, to say, well, don't think of it this way. If you think of it this way, and they said, I understand that. And the risk was I was not teaching it. I was explaining a different way than the textbook, but they understood. And so you get that's a little bit of a rush on that too. So take that risk in a different way, and I think that's what I tell to people. Say, think of some new way to approach something, and then give it a shot. And if it works, you'll feel great. And if it doesn't, it's sort of like Thomas Edison, right? Who spent 1,000 times he tried to do the light bulb, and they said, you're a failure. He said, no, I know 1,000 things that don't work. I'm just looking for the next one that does. And don't just get discouraged.
Yeah, but one thing you said a minute ago really touches me, and that is the rush part. This is a quality of life issue. If
Sure.
you have success, if you take a risk and you have success, if you participate in excellence, if you win the game or win it for yourself, you have a better quality of life. Your time on the planet
Exactly
is
right.
better spent.
Exactly right. Yeah, and life is we're more than a material creature. There's essence and soul in all humans and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times that rush comes from just having done something new I'm still trying to. I want to, before I die, I want to do something that nobody else has done before. I have yet to do that, but that one original. But on the other hand, I've tried some different things and some different things as you have. And,
Admiral, it's great to spend the time with you.
Jay, it's been really good.
Energy
with
is
you.
infectious.
You keep fighting the fight, and because it really is, it's going to be better. You got to believe it.
I
Everything's gonna be
do,
better.
and with you, it will be better. Thank you
So
for the
good.
leadership.
Well, thank you for all you're doing for the community too. And,
Aloha. Zap Zlatoper, our favorite admiral. Thanks for coming down.
thanks, Ryan.